Hi, I'm back again, and I am sorry for the interruption. This is the first week in which we've had some technical difficulties, and I'm glad it didn't happen on election night. So I hope that the panelists will be able to join us. But in the meantime, if you have questions, you can put it in the Q&A or in the chat. I can't figure out why it's not working. Shoot. Let's go to the participants. All right, I am.
Can you hear me, Joel?
Yes, I just promoted you. I don't know why we had. Let me see if I can get Marcela. This is the first time that it has promote to panelist. So I just promoted you, and I will do the same to Marcela.
You'll need to do the start the video co-host. I don't remember what it was, but
yeah. All right.
yeah.
Let's get rid of why can't promote to panelist. All right. It's not letting me. All right, so I promoted you. Now I have to get to.
I think you're promoting. I think you're promoting everyone.
Oh my goodness!
Somehow.
All right.
Well, this is going to be a fun panel.
Okay. Well. Oh my goodness. Why can't I do the video? It's
I think it's in settings.
Yeah, I
Webinar
usually
settings.
have settings with the video, and I am not allowed to talk more. It doesn't give me the video.
Is there an option for make co-host?
No.
Hmm.
And that is why I am confused. I'm dealing with attendees and not the folks who have signed on through the link. So it's not letting me.
Well, I mean, maybe we just do this as a return to radio kind of experience.
All right, wait a minute. We'll do. Let's not give up. All right. You know what's blocked? Okay, let me see why it's not letting me. Gee, that's bad.
Perhaps it's not letting you. It won't concede the time.
No. Yeah, I don't think it knows the time. What the chat has taken. Let me get rid of the chat for the moment.
Thank you, everyone, for your patience. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for saying that. This is peculiar. Oh, wait a minute. What's unusual is when I go to my normal location for the video, it doesn't say video. It just says chat, promote to panelists. And why can't I promote to co-host?
Hmm.
That's another way to do it. Let
What's
me,
interesting, Becca, is Joel's name doesn't have the title co-host.
Well, no, I mean, on mine it says host.
yes,
Okay,
but
mine does not say that Joel's the host.
all right,
It
I
doesn't say
will,
anyone's the host. Yeah.
I will try to get, why can't, well, I'm really sorry for this problem. I can't even get your names anymore. We are, I seem to have lost. Now maybe let's look at the panelists. Ah, all right. Make co-host. All right.
Ooh.
Are you guys on?
Hello.
There you go. All right.
Aha.
This wasn't easy. I'm
Success.
sorry. I'm sorry. I needed to go to the panelists and not the attendees. All
Well,
right.
we're in good company because the New York Times today had technical problems when they had Dr. Fauci on. So
All
we're
right.
in good company.
Well, I'm not going to claim to be I'm not going to claim to be the Times, and you won't claim to be Dr. Fauci. Thank you, everyone in the audience, for your patience. As I said earlier, this is a good thing it didn't happen election night, or people would have thought that we were keeping the news from folks. Let me try to reintroduce everybody now that we have pictures and video and audio. Today's session was supposed to be devoted to looking ahead to the Biden administration and with regard to policies and personnel and changes that they might make from the outgoing administration. Let me, before I turn to our guests, I just want to say that one of the members of the class had a Zoom chat with me, I think at the end of, it may have been Monday. And she wanted to know, it was over the weekend, actually. The days are running into each other. And she wanted to know what were the chances of the Trump challenges overturning the results. And we had a discussion about that. And I just made the point that in every election, there are always challenges, and there are always inappropriate ballots counted or not counted, legitimate ballots lost. So the challenger needs to show not only did these untoward events happen, which the Trump campaign is claiming a great deal of, but that the ballots in question will be enough to reverse the initial decision. And so it's not enough for any judge to hear improper activities were conducted, negligent activities, incompetent activities, but whether or not the margin would change. And I think, although my colleagues will probably know more up-to-date data, the last time I heard in the state of Pennsylvania, for example, Biden had about a 50,000 vote margin excess of Trump's votes. So in order to really challenge that result, the Trump campaign would have to show orders of magnitude on that scale of the improper vote counting and so on. Arizona is significantly closer. I think the last time I saw it was about 15,000 votes. These are large numbers when you're making claims about thousands of votes. So I told the student that I didn't think that either Trump challenges were false or that they would measure up to the number that needed to overturn the result. Rebecca or Marcela, do you have any comments on that issue?
I think you explained it very well. I don't think that in past recounts, when there have been a change in the number of votes that each individual candidate got, it's usually that the amount that changes in a recount or in a challenge is usually a couple hundred, not ever, there's never been really more than that. And because we're talking about even in closer states where it's 11,000 votes that separate the two candidates, there would have to be widespread fraud or negligence, and there hasn't yet been any evidence of that brought to court, which is why many of these cases that have been brought have been thrown out, because there's no evidence, there's just claims.
There were ballots found in Georgia, 2,600 in Georgia that were quote unquote found. But they, I think, mostly broke for Biden. And so that didn't support the threshold that they were all Trump votes. And it wasn't what my colleague Essler, Dr. Essler, refers to is that there was no coordinated malicious fraud, right? So the 2,600 that they found were about, what's it called? What are those things? The memory card?
And yeah, it was an SD card that didn't get taken out of the voting machine.
Yeah, and then that's it. So it wasn't intent on purpose. It wasn't coordinated. There was other votes, I believe, found in Michigan, I think like 9,000, but he's so far ahead. And again, they split. 9,000 does not mean 9,000 for Trump. It means 9,000 votes. And they were found again in under similar circumstances. Something just didn't get picked up. And so it's not, the court cases aren't meant to overturn the election. They're meant to sow discord and doubt about the Biden presidency, so that the current president of the United States can walk away with his ego intact. The problem that is resulting in is that it's being Trump promoted and by the Republican Party, which also means that if the election was lost or stolen for Trump, that also would put in jeopardy all of the gains that they made. But they're ignoring that part, and so you've seen a lot of pressure from, for example, Senator Graham, who may be facing some or should be facing criminal prosecution for having pressured the Georgia is it Secretary of State or Elections Commissioner for having Secretary of State for saying wink wink, hey, don't you want to look closer, wink wink, at those particular signatures, wink wink, indicating that he really wants those legal ballots tossed because they're not from the right kind of voter. And whether or not that was his intent or not, that was the perception. And in the case of election fraud, that's enough, right? Like or particularly in the case of meddling with voter turnout and voter counts, that's enough. Like you don't actually have to prove that somebody goes through with it and actually does what you ask. It's enough to do that, because it is considered such an important and protected right that you aren't supposed to meddle in anybody's vote being counted in that particular way. And if you do, that even in the insinuation of it is in and of itself a criminal act. So hopefully Senator Graham will actually be held accountable, but we will see, because that's unlikely.
Isn't it true though, and I should introduce our wonderful guest properly. We were so distracted by the technical issues. I never introduced Professors Marcela Garcia-Castanon and Professor Rebecca Essler, who you have seen in earlier presentations of this webinar. I just wanted to make two historical points. Isn't it true that the Clinton administration made challenges in 2016 and carried those challenges, I think, even into the month of December in 2016? So I think we're really in a period when in close elections where there isn't an avalanche, the parties are going to make challenges, whether it is for the stated reason of trying to overturn the results, or whether for other implicit reasons, as you suggested, Marcela, challenging the legitimacy of the new administration, which again was done in 2016. And it looks like we will see a repetition of that in 2020. I just wanted to make one other historical point, and I can't be sure of the number, but in 2000, when we had the Gore-Bush dispute in the state of Florida, we were talking about a difference of, I believe the number is seared into my mind, 139 votes, somewhere like that. It wasn't 130.
It was 534, which isn't that much bigger, but I mean,
Okay.
we're still talking well under 1,000.
And there were millions of votes cast in Florida. And so that contest was really within the kind of numbers that a challenge could overturn. And the vote counting was only stopped by the Supreme Court decision in Gore versus Bush. And there the challenge was not, I mean, when you think of the scale of 2020, having 11,000 or 14,000 or 50,000 is way beyond 2,000 and the kinds of numbers that Florida, the closeness of Florida was really incredible to think that it would be so close with so many. Okay, we have dealt with the past and
Can I clarify that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I do think that there's a false equivalence to the idea that there were legal challenges in 2000, 2004, 2008, 2012. Like in all of these cases, there are always legal challenges, but at no point did any of the eventual losers claim that the election was stolen before having gone through any of those processes, or even after, right? And there is legitimate reason to think that Florida was decided in favor of the not winner, right? And so the damage isn't because the president of the United States is currently pursuing all legal recourse, which he has a legal right to do. The damage is that it's already being spun into a narrative of, regardless of whether the truth is on my side or not, I won, period, full stop. So any decision from the court is some coordinated attack on my legitimacy as the president. Any decision from state attorneys, any decision from the 50 states is a coordinated attempt to steal this election. And that is the damage. It's not the legal recourse. It's not the challenging of the ballots. That is normal, normal election behavior. The abnormal is the fact that regardless of what any of those things find, there has already been a clear indication that it doesn't matter. And
the contrast, again, history is not my strength, but I do want to call attention, supporting your point, Marcela. Gore never really claimed that the election was stolen when one could make a case that he had an argument about that. And I read enough references to know that many analysts consider the 1960 election stolen, actually in Chicago and in Illinois. And Richard Nixon did not. He took the high road and he did not bring that up. And he accepted defeat when he probably could have had a significant challenge to the election result. So your point is that most people, most candidates who lose up until the current situation accept their fate, even if they disagree with it. And that's not what we're seeing now. Go, Rebecca, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think it's really important to recognize that in some of these past legal challenges, the argument being put forth by the losing side is not been fraud. The argument has been, let's check that the election has been administered correctly according to the laws of the state where that election was run. So that's a very important distinction. It's substantively massively different. Claims of fraud and corruption and abuse are malicious. They're malignant in a democracy. Legal questions of administration and procedure are healthy for democracy. We want to make sure our elections are being run correctly and that opportunities where there potentially was human error, like forgetting a SD card in a machine, are found so that those votes are counted and truth comes out. And so that's healthy. That's healthy legal challenge. And that's mostly what we've seen in the past. The legal challenges now are not about the health of our democracy and the health of our elections. And that's where I find them qualitatively different in their character.
Okay. I think that's a really excellent point that I'm not sure the media that I look at have made. And there is this blurring of challenges without realizing the distinctions that you and Marcela have made. Okay, let's turn to the future, which is the topic for today. And what we have done in the past in this course when we had a change in administrations is to clearly, we're not forecasting, we're not predicting, we're speculating and exchanging ideas about what the next 4 years will mean in the executive branch under a Biden administration. Who would like to go first, Marcela or Rebecca? Do you have a preference?
I can go.
Okay.
Actually might have to, I don't know if you can hear my child trying to break down the door. I'm gonna have to leave a little bit after 5.
That to happen. We'll have to tell him I will make a challenge if he does.
Yes. He might see their match your challenge. Anyway, but so in terms of the next steps, I think actually it's a little bit ambiguous because we don't know how this is all going to play out. There are several questions in the Q&A, so I'm going to try to power through some of them. So a Biden administration can't do a whole lot without a Senate, right? So really the focus is going to be on Georgia, so January 5th. After that, once we figure out who with the power of the Senate falls, which is going to very likely continue to be a Republican majority because it's Georgia, it's gonna likely go red anyway.
Can you explain also, the Republicans probably will have 50 senators right now and the Democrats have 48. So the Republicans will only need one out of the 2 contests on January 5th, and they would have 51, and that would give them the power to organize the Senate according to Republican chairs and so on. If they win both, they will have a 52-48 majority, which is not very large, and the Democratic side could still win some votes by winning Republican senators over, but the organization of the Senate, the chairs, the staff would all go to the Republicans.
Correct. And so I don't think that there will be a shift. I think it's going to probably very likely stay with that 51 Republican majority, probably 52, but we'll see. Because there's so that helps explain a lot of the Republican messaging right now. They're rallying around the party because and behind the president's allegations of fraud, because it helps keep everybody sort of unified and keeps Georgia in people's minds. And so we really can't have a conversation about like eliminating the filibuster, which is one of the questions, stacking the court, which is another one of those questions, until that question is really answered. So we're kind of in limbo until we know that. It's unlikely that the results will be overturned. It's unlikely that states will place Trump electors so that he like steals the electoral college in that particular way. All of that is very, very like low likelihood, and that would in fact have to be a very well coordinated overturning of power, overturning of the people's votes, and would result in significant, like it would definitely lead to people in the streets. And so when we're thinking then about what the Biden administration is going to walk into, say everything works out and it's January 20th and noon has struck, and Joe Biden is going to be president of the United States, legally, constitutionally, there is no doubt about that, assuming everything works out institutionally from here to then. That means that he's going to have to work with the Mitch McConnell Senate and a Nancy Pelosi House, which is exactly what we have now. And as we know, they can't even agree on today being Sunday, or wait, sorry, today being Tuesday, and apparently neither can I, today being Tuesday. And so it's going to have to be a lot of executive orders, right? A lot of the powers of the executive being put into the exact same kinds of positions that Trump has taken, right? All of the executive orders, a lot of the policies that have been enacted under Trump have been entirely around executive orders. I'm not the expert on that. I'm going to let Dr. Essler speak to that shortly. But what it also is going to mean is that a lot of the power of the presidency is going to be on foreign affairs and in foreign affairs. So China, Iran, oh my gosh, North Korea, right? The question of what's going to happen between now and the election. I have to stop reading the news sometimes because you read incredibly difficult to understand and difficult to digest stories, like the fact that Donald Trump wanted to have a missile strike against Iran, I believe, but was dissuaded against it. That could still happen between, there's 70 days or so. It's unlikely, right? But we honestly have no gauge on this president, unhinged, right? And so who knows? And then the other story that I've been reading about, following, is that he's also trying to cement as much of his anti-China policy and tariffs through executive actions, through sort of legal maneuvering, so that even if the Biden camp comes in and tries to amend some of the Iranian mend some of the Iranian relationships, or mend some of the Chinese relationships, it's going to basically not start from zero. It's going to have been dug as deep as possible and made as difficult to save face as possible with those two nations, that by the time he's done, he might be back to zero, right? Like all the progress from the Obama administration that was made with either one of those is gone, right? And so all of that goodwill, and there's no trust internationally of the US or their ability to keep stability in mind. And so Donald Trump is talking about running in 2024. So some of these leaders are going to probably say like, cool, like, we'll see who wins in 2024, which is not where you want to be. Because if
Let
you
me
get
just interject, Marcela, that I'm adopting the moderator's trade in
I ramble. Go
television.
ahead.
Next week, the next webinar is in 2 weeks. Next week is Thanksgiving week off. And in 2 weeks, I invited our IR colleagues to talk about the Biden administration in the area of foreign relations. So
Yeah.
your
We'll know more.
comments are a good intro to next week. And they like to speculate all the time about foreign
They do.
policy. So
They do.
I suspect that in 2 weeks on December 1st, we will have a lively discussion, and I'll do my best to make sure everybody gets on the webinar on time.
Good.
I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted
No,
to
that's good. And
highlight.
I'm not even an IR person, so I'm like, this is just what I've been paying attention to in the news, and so I'm freaking out about it in my own little way. My IR people, they're always freaked out about that sort of stuff. So they 2 weeks from now, the whole world could look different. So we'll also, in 2 weeks, we'll also know whether the votes have been certified, and we'll be that much closer to the final quote unquote electoral college vote.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so with that, actually, I think by then we'll know a lot more about the institutional stuff that my colleague Essler can illuminate for us to toss the ball into
Awesome.
the floor.
What about, do you have any ideas or preferences or insights about people in the Biden administration?
Oh, it's so it's 52% minority staff already. There's about 4,000 positions that have to be filled by election day or around election day, and they already have a good chunk that, I'm sorry, inauguration. Yes, thank you. The saving grace of having Joe Biden with his 40 plus years of service is the fact that he knows how to run a government. He knows how to run it from the inside out. So you're not going to stump him by trying to like hide the stapler. He brings his own stapler, right? And he's got it all worked out, including for positions that have been eliminated or destroyed or politicized, or however you want to think about it, under this particular administration. They've got a plan. I mean, he already has his COVID task force in place, and they're already having conversations and trying to coordinate with this administration. We'll see if they're able to do any of that. So I think regardless, I think he'll hit the ground running. I think the most, with at least 52% minority and women in his administration. And I would bet that number is actually going to go higher if you include women as part of the minority category. And so it's, yeah, that's how I feel. And in terms of like who his cabinet might be, I think it's still too early to speculate across the board. I think that there's going to be a shuffle, and because of the electoral map, I think that there's going to have to be a really careful consideration of, if you pluck this amazing Democrat from this position, does the seat go to a Republican? Because that's where the struggle is going to be real for the next couple of years. And so Democrats are going to make choices, or are going to help the Biden-Harris administration make choices to not hand seats over to the Republican Party, at least for the first 2 years.
Your point about Biden's experience just set off in my own mind. We have gone from one pole to the other. We had an elected president who had zero experience in 2016. And one of the early characteristics of the Trump administration was how difficult it was for them to get their act together to make those 4,000 political appointments. And now we're on the other side of the spectrum with someone who has seen decades of presidents coming in and actually experienced the transition effort as vice president twice.
Yes.
So your point about experience is really important. I don't want to keep you from your important rounds.
It's okay. You have me for 15 more minutes. So I want to hear what Dr. Essler has to say.
All right, go ahead, Rebecca.
Well, so I'll just start by saying, because I focus on domestic policy only, and try to, I mean, I don't actually ignore foreign policy. I pay attention to it as a newsreader, but I try not to panic about anything. So I actually think I have a little bit more of an optimistic point of view about what the Biden administration is going to be able to do. So, I mean, first, caveats. There is going to be divided government. That means that we are going to see gridlock when it comes to getting legislation through Congress. That is going to be incredibly difficult. Any of the reforms of the legislative branch that had been tossed around by Democratic thinkers over the last 2 years are not going to happen. So filibuster reform, expanding the court, not going to happen. When it comes to executive action, and I use the term executive action very intentionally because there's it's an umbrella term, meaning executive orders, yes, but also memoranda and proclamations and the purchasing power of the White House, of the executive branch, are 4 kinds of actions that presidents can take that can have massive consequences. Maybe not for every part of American society, but the federal government is so large that even an order to just the federal government that the president has the ability to do can have massive implications. So one example, if the Biden administration decided to do so, they could issue an executive order or an executive memoranda in which they raise the minimum wage for federal contractors to $15 an hour. And okay, that doesn't affect, you and me, assuming we're working for a company like Barnes and Noble, but anyone who supplies things to the federal government. So anyone who has, who say manufactures copiers in the United States, all the folks who work in the plant building those copiers, they are in essence, that because they sell those copiers to the federal government, they are federal contractors and are thus, that $15 minimum wage would apply to them. If the Biden administration wants to make it policy that every automobile purchased by the federal government for its use is hybrid or electric only, that raises the demand for hybrid and electric vehicles. So there are ways where, without congressional involvement at all, the president can put real pressure on sort of the environment, the political world, that can produce behavior changes where, if you've got, all of a sudden you've got this huge demand because you're a car manufacturer for your electric vehicles, that in order to deliver your very lucrative government contract, you need to amp up the amount of plants you have producing and assembling those vehicles. Well, then you're going to have more capacity generally, even once that contract is completed. So you may say, well, I built this plant. I'm going to need to employ more people. I'm going to be able to make more of these cars generally that I can sell to consumers, maybe at a slightly cheaper price because it doesn't cost me quite as much to make them anymore. There can be these ripple effects even when the initial impetus is only in the federal government. So, that's a dynamic that I think we don't always appreciate the power of executive action and how nuanced it can be. The other thing is, so the way you overturn executive action, there are a couple of paths. One is another president comes in and signs an executive order saying, forget that old executive order, we're going to have something new. And that's what's going to happen a lot on day one. We hear talk about day one, President-elect Biden will revoke the Muslim ban, will secure DACA. I mean, there are these various things that it's just a paper to undo what was signed by President Trump. They can also, because you can only take executive action where there is congressional inaction, where there is not a law specifying how something will be done, Congress, if it wants to change what a president has done via executive action, has to overcome the collective action problem and act together in order to pass a law to contraindicate what the president has done. We've already talked about it's going to be hard for Congress to do anything. So that sort of prevents Congress from stopping the president in some ways. And then there are the courts. The courts have been the largest way for presidential executive actions to be overturned in the past. But in certain areas, particularly if there is a national security or foreign policy justification for an executive action, the courts have been very inclined to grant presidents deference for those actions. So, when we look at the argument that President Trump has made so that he could direct military spending to construction of a southern border wall, the reason that has not been able to be shut down by the courts, even as it's using eminent domain, in my opinion, improperly, it's because there is this sort of justification, whether it's a valid justification or not, completely different story, but there is a justification that can be made that ties it to where courts give presidents power. So just because every 4 years it can be easy to undo what a president has done doesn't mean that those 4 years and what gets accomplished is meaningless via executive action. So that's sort of how that's some of the why I'm a little bit more optimistic about what might be able to happen in the next few years.
I think I wanted to just mention, when you mentioned the buying power of the federal government, $4 trillion goes a long way. And the federal budget is so large that it can affect any market in the world, let alone just within the United States. I actually made some notes that do either of you have comments about the process in which the Pandemic Advisory Committee was released? I mean, there wasn't much discussion on who the candidates were going to be. It was almost as if that was decided way earlier. Is that a clue to how the Biden administration is going to be doing things, that they're going to have plans? Something Marcela said, that they're going to have a lot of plans in place, and they won't be scrambling to choose committees or appointments, but actually have decisions made earlier.
I think, sorry, I was trying to read through the Q&A. There's lots going on.
Yeah, I'll do that later.
I think that this part, this is a thing that functioning governments do really well, is that they can chew gum and talk at the same time. And so it's surprising, because we haven't had a functioning government for or fully functioning government for 3 to 4 years. That the Biden campaign is separate from the Biden transition, even if it's the same people. Biden has had enough experience to know that you still have all of that information you have all of those lined up, but you don't announce that stuff, because you want to make sure to win first before you start talking about transition teams. And so I bet that he had a lot of transition leadership in place, right? Sort of on the under the radar after the what's that thing in August? The convention, after the convention. And he set it aside, right? He's like, he did the work of winning the election, and that was what his focus was election day. And then, but simultaneously, while that was running, he had this other team in place, and they were vetting and looking at different teams, and measuring what's going to be the most important thing facing the Biden administration is going to be this third surge of COVID cases that's going to come between the now and the inauguration. And so he probably had a lot of that there and had already reached out, because these are folks. There's three faculty from UCSF, actually, they're locals here. but they're also faculty who have a deep connection to pandemic preparation. Specifically, I think one of them has connections to like the AIDS epidemic that hit San Francisco in the late 80s, early 90s. And so these are folks who know what they're doing, who've proven that they know what they're doing. He put into place, and I always forget the names, but he put into place the guy who ran the Ebola response. And if we recall, Ebola did not turn into a pandemic. It was about five people total, including 3 who were infected because they were part of the treatment team, protecting the 2 people who were brought in. And so these are all decisions that were probably made pre-election night, but because that's just the smart thing to do, right? Is like, you want to make sure, because you don't know whether or not the other side is going to cooperate, that you have things going, you have things moving, and because there was some suspicion that this administration wouldn't concede, and they haven't conceded, and they haven't been doing due diligence of helping transition peacefully or functionally the government over to a Biden administration. And so I think there's a lot that we haven't seen that's going to come up and look like, oh my gosh, like this is really well put together, but that has probably been in the works for a couple of months in advance, right? And that's just good governance. That's just somebody who knows, like, you don't start the day after the election. If you start the day after the election, you're already way behind. And so that's how I feel, or that's what I think about it.
And that last sentence, Marcela, probably described the Trump transition effort, probably because the campaign was not certain or even probable that they were going to win. And therefore, the preparation for a transition that you talked about was not done. I think.
So I want to interject something. Legally, every campaign starting in March has to designate a transition leader. So there are certain official steps that have to be taken well in advance. They're not public steps, but they are legally mandated steps to establish a transition team should a candidate win. So it starts in the transition planning starts in March while the primaries are being run. A really good campaign is not just doing the minimum that they're required to do. They're really invested in this idea of transition planning as a part of campaigning. So there definitely is still space for it to seem like the realization of, oh God, we're going to have to govern comes the day after the result is announced. But even the Trump administration, when it was President-elect Trump, officially was like, oh, we picked someone to do that, didn't we?
Chris Christie.
Yeah.
Chris Christie was, and then he got kicked out by Kushner.
and then there was turnover. There's actually been more turnover today. The thing that's astounding to me institutionally about the Trump presidency is we have had more turnover in positions in the administration than in every presidential administration of the last 100 years combined.
That's
4 years
to
run through the number of people who left and then were replaced during a presidential. I mean, we're not counting the people who leave in between a 2-term presidency. That's very normal to have a change in between the 2 terms, but not this much turnover in the middle. Not normal.
Okay. Maybe we should turn to, unless either of you want to make another point about policies. Rebecca, you talked about the $15 minimum wage.
Yeah, I mean, there have been all sorts of policies that have been talked about that perhaps will be part of this first wave of executive orders. So reestablishing the DACA program as it was fully functioning under President Obama, and the way that happened.
Technically, it was reestablished last week by a court that said Chad Wolf has no. But yes, but giving it the presidential power.
Yeah, giving the to not just be grudging that you have
Yeah.
to do X, Y, and Z, but to give presidential support saying, I want you to prioritize this. I want these applications to be done quickly. I want you to reduce how much the application costs potentially. Like there are all these administrative steps that could be taken not just to maintain the legality of the program, but to enhance the availability of the program. So that's one. There's been some discussion that President-elect Biden could cancel student loan debt up to a certain dollar amount, assuming these are federally held student loans. I mean, there's the thing with executive action is there's always caveats on stuff. But just because there are caveats doesn't mean there couldn't be huge implications for ordinary people. So there's been discussion of that. There's been some discussion that a Biden administration would be more friendly towards actually enforcing our antitrust laws. So there are laws on the books about companies not precluding competition or merging in such a way as to reduce the options that are available to consumers that have not been enforced at all. In fact, there have been some very, very large mergers that have occurred in the last 4 years that really probably should have raised antitrust red flags that haven't been, because the Justice Department was not encouraged to do that. Well, if he wants to, President Biden can't necessarily say, go back and look at this old thing, but any large mergers that come to you going forward, where there might be antitrust implications, look at those real closely. And that could have a lot of effect on the prices of services that we purchase, the availability of goods from different manufacturers. Can Amazon, just show you the products it recommends and how it goes about the decision of recommending certain products over others? Can have antitrust implications. What are some, of course, just handle the Ebola response. The COVID response more effectively. And yes, there are things that the president doesn't have the power to do. There's not a power to do a national mask mandate, but there is persuasion power.
There's a carrot and a stick. Yeah.
Yeah, there's real persuasion power. There's, we can encourage governors to do things. A president can also set an example for the public and, reinforce the visual that it is normal to wear a mask, that this is just how we live life for a while. A President Biden could model getting the eventually approved vaccine. Like, that might help persuade people, oh, well, if Biden got it, it must be safe to get. And actually, a really interesting story I read today, in China, there have been vaccines that have been put out that they have not released efficacy data, but because various leaders of the Chinese Communist Party have talked about being vaccinated, the public has expressed more willingness to receive the inoculation themselves. Like, that kind of behavioral leadership is nowhere in the Constitution, but we give it to the president these days. And so it's really important that a president behave in the way that they want the public to behave.
I just wanted to show an interesting symmetry that occurred to me when Trump would talk about the virus and federal plans. Democratic governors became prominent in disagreeing. Cuomo and Newsom and other Democratic governors. We already have announcements from the governors of North Dakota and I think Arkansas that they would not abide by a national mandate for masking. And it seemed to me that what will happen is that Biden will make statements about the virus and a different set of governors will get prominent media play objecting to the Biden recommendation. And in a way, if you're an advocate of federalism, the story really highlights the both sides, showing that the state governor is really powerful in this area.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's absolutely federalism at play. The governor has every right to put in place a mask mandate or not. But I think there's a sort of logical consequences kind of a situation where, okay, your governor says, we're not doing this. We're not putting in a mask mandate. Given, and other governors say, well, maybe we should, especially if it's coming from the top, it's coming from the federal government, that we should be doing this. I can't help but think that we're going to end up seeing a difference in the case rates in states where masking becomes more common because it's being encouraged at all levels versus not. And that's kind of, I mean, it's horrid, it's horrible, but like, if people are getting sick and dying around you, like the blame goes on the governor saying, I will defy the federal government in this way. It's much easier to say no masks when the federal government's also saying no masks.
I agree with all of that, but I also think it's a little bit more nuanced. And I find it ironic that we look to China for an example of behavioral leadership, because literally Ted Cruz today was given some Democrat a hard time for insisting that their colleague wear a mask on the floor of the Senate, please and thank you, and they told them to F off. And so and so there's already that performativity. There's also the criticism of the right of Harry Styles, which you'll appreciate, wearing a dress on the cover of Vogue as being unmanly. And I'm like, okay, sure. But also the screaming female fans that he's got have certainly no problems with that level of manhood. And have you heard of David Bowie? And so, or even Prince for that matter, as I soon. And so I think the carrot and the stick is going to be really important, because we already are seeing Republican governors, the governor of Iowa, saying that, well, there's two sides to the mask science. And everyone's like, what side is the other side? The other side is dead. That's what those two sides are. There is no two sides to the mask science. And the governor of South Dakota, who has been a prominent Trump supporter, and basically said, yeah, let's have that giant motorcycle rally with no masks. That's what South Dakota is about. And then when people started dying, it's like, well, whatever, and has like nothing, right? And so the idea here is, what tools would the Biden administration have, particularly given, for example, the GSA has not, I forget the term that was used, but like certified or ascertained, the official term, ascertained who the winner is. They are limited in the scope, but they were limited by the fact that they're not in government anyways. And so what other things can they do is that they can strategize and say, okay, well, we know the Republican governors are going to come out and criticize this. Okay, cool. We are going to prioritize states for PPE and government funding who have mask mandates. If your county in a state that doesn't have a mask mandate, you'll get PPE before these other locations, because you don't think it's real, so you don't need the PPE, right? And you certainly don't need, and we're hearing stories this week of people literally dying, and nurses reporting that they're saying it's not COVID, it's lung cancer, it's not COVID, it's a hoax. Why are you wearing PPE? It's a hoax. And so I think it's more than just the performative at this point. It has penetrated deep enough that people are literally dying of COVID-19 and telling you that it's not COVID-19.
That was in El Paso.
Yeah.
And that was a remarkable story to read by the nurse who actually saw people in that situation that you described. Marcela, someone asked, what impacts will Trump not cooperating or the GSA not recognizing the Biden administration as official regarding the transition? How significant, what will be the impacts of the GSA not recognizing the
So
Biden?
once the Electoral College meets, it doesn't matter. We're talking about what can be done in the window in between now and the Electoral College meeting on
December 14th.
December 14th.
That's what I was thinking. So, I mean, in some ways, the impacts are explicitly impacts are minimal because the Biden campaign can continue making decisions and doing what it's doing and selecting people. In other ways, it is more meaningful because they're not getting all the information that the president has access to. They're not getting the daily briefing. They're not being allowed to talk to and use money and other resources of the federal government. So
millions of dollars of resources, can we stipulate? This isn't like, here's some post-it notes. I mean,
millions of dollars at the level of spending at the federal government, when we're talking trillions, is significant. I'm not saying it's not significant funding, but it's also not an amount of money that stops them from doing what they're doing. It just would be easier. It would be better. It would, but it's a month. And there's some who say, okay, but that's a month that slows things down. A lot of the concern about the month comes from the reports, the 9/11 Commission reports, in which said that the delay in certifying the election and starting the transition caused the Bush administration to be behind, not just in national security, but in staffing up of everything. I think we're seeing something different in this transition, even though it hasn't been certified. There is clarity of who the winner is, so that they are making the plan. They are staffing, they're making the plan of who they're going to put in these positions when they do have the official go ahead. Whereas I would, not having observed the Bush and Gore campaigns firsthand myself, but I would bet that because they were so consumed by the counting and the court cases and figuring out who would be the eventual winner, they weren't doing the staffing up that I think is happening during the Biden transition.
That's a good point. Yeah, go ahead, Marcel.
Her name is Emily Murphy. She's the director. I'm like, name it, right? She's the director of the GSA, Trump appointee. This, I think, has been the first time I've ever had a conversation with non-political scientists about the functions and the actors within institutions of the US government. They're like, what the hell is the GSA? I'm like, well, I'm like, her name is Emily Murphy, and she's the director of the GSA, which is the General Service Administration. And they get you your paper clips, right? And so
office furniture.
And office furniture. They allocate space. They do the functional administrative parts of like of getting a government to function as much as it functions. And so I think that's the first thing to take away from this whole conversation. But the second thing is, my concern is less actually about the Biden campaign being staffed. I have full vested trust that they know what they're doing because they've done it before, but also because they have professionals in place and not somebody's interior decorator. Mm-hmm. What I'm more concerned about is any sort of poison pills or like little mini time bombs of all of a sudden the Trump administration decides to fire everybody who's going to have to do all those all the vetting of the people coming in, which is something they technically could do. I mean, it would be technically illegal because there are public service, civil servant protections. But as we know, they have fired people before or tried to move entire branches of the government to the middle of nowhere, Kansas on a month notice, right? So there are things that they could do that are disruptive just out of sheer spite and pity and pettiness. And honestly, I believe almost everything at this point you could tell me, because every time I've been like, that can't possibly, they wouldn't do that. At this point, I've been proven wrong more often than I've been proven right. And so I would be more attentive to whether or not the Biden administration is prepared for that sort of eventuality. And I bet that they are, right? Like they had election night, they had about 50 different briefs pre-written for every potential court case that could have come at any one of those states, right? And so they know what they're doing. They know who they're dealing with. Nobody's at all surprised that this is the response of this administration. They are surprised, however, by the level of support that he has managed to get. Like at the both at the institutional level, but also at the GOP level, right? Like the number of senators coming out in support, that is actually, I think, the more destructive and the more problematic part, because they're going to continue those trends, because what they haven't lost anything. And so Ted Cruz and his colleagues are going to continue to not wear masks on the floor of the Senate. And what is that going to do when they're trying to pass legislation, right? Are you, like, you're literally going to chase people out of the building because you, like, they're respecting six feet of distance and you aren't, right? And so they think it's funny, but it's not. So, oh, we have another panelist.
Oh, I need to see her name.
Amanda.
Where is Amanda? I'd love to. Let me go to participate.
I got it. I got her, I think.
I got her.
Oh, okay.
Perfect.
And now-
Perfect. And I'm like, not because she just joined, but because I'm like, my baby is officially done with his dad, and I have to go. But I'm like, I'll wait for her to actually connect to see.
Thank you, Marcela, so much for tolerating the rough start and then making your always insightful comments.
Yeah, Joel, I think we may have to make her a co-host.
Oh, all right, I will.
I'll wait till it's settled before I jump off. But y'all are in good hands. Rebecca and Amanda are both incredible.
All right, Amanda, sorry for. There you are.
We're good.
Yeah, well, you were just part of the initial excitement that we had here. Rebecca told me that there were problems with the New York Times interview with Fauci today. So we're in good company. We had technical difficulties. I'd love to have you make a statement about what your thoughts are about the Biden administration, but there was a question about taxes, a whole new topic, which we haven't gone to. And the question I wanted to know, in relation to the massive debt, do you think Biden will increase taxes to deal with, I think the latest number is a $23 trillion debt?
Well, so I mean, my fellow panelists can correct me if I'm wrong, but my reading of the Constitution is that all taxing must come from Congress and it must come from the House of Representatives, which means no, Biden can't just unilaterally raise taxes. That's one of those areas where, you know, as expansive as I was talking about earlier, executive action can be, taxing, I mean, I should say, there's sort of a nuance. What the president can do is, as head of the executive branch, he can give the executive branch directions about how to carry things out. So something like taxes, which are not
like telling the IRS to do its job and audit all of those major corporations who have yet to pay taxes. Yes. That is one of the things that they can direct them to do. And yes, their taxes will go up because they will actually be forced to pay them.
Yes, yeah. That's exactly the nuance, that they can be direct, that the president can direct the IRS saying, you need to pay more attention to this class of tax filers, but they can't actually change what it is, the criteria by which the IRS is evaluating those tax filers. That is Congress.
Okay, Amanda.
I'm gonna bow out. I'm sorry. Sorry, Amanda. I'm gonna bow out. Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Good night, everybody. Thanks, you all. Bye.
Thank you for your great ideas. I appreciate them greatly, and for tolerating the rough start. This is, let me introduce you properly, Professor Amanda Roberti, and she was on election night, and I'm so glad she's on now. And the topic is looking to the Biden administration in domestic affairs, personnel, policies, what you expect will happen in the 60 days before or after inauguration. Any topic is open for your comment.
Wow, thank you so much, Professor Kassila. And this is very exciting to talk about, especially considering any topic is open. Domestic policy is my forte, especially reproductive politics and policy. So the Biden administration, I've been thinking about this. Professor Garcia-Castanon said that, perfectly, right? These are folks who have already had experience in politics and governance. So whatever information they're kind of not getting right now, they're going to be able to make up very quickly. I think there's going to be a lot of damage assessment that has to be done. And maybe folks have already said this, so I'm sorry if I'm echoing anything, but yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of damage assessment. What I expect Biden to do, I mean, things that he said he wanted to do from the start that can be done kind of unilaterally, like rejoin the Paris Accord and, kind of things on the environmental level, rolling, or I don't know if I would say rolling back, but I don't know how to say this, but kind of taking rolling forward, yes. Like the regulations, environmental regulations that were previously rolled back, but now he could reinstate some of those things. So some of the executive orders or executive actions that President Trump has taken, he could kind of undo or do differently or something like that. I expect immediately upon taking the oath of office, usually every single Democratic president after Reagan has done, which is to rescind the global gag rule, which we might know, also known as the Mexico City policy, which is basically that any health organization that receives federal funding cannot kind of interact or talk about or promote abortion in any kind of way, shape, or form, which, I suppose international organizations, like these organizations who are so affected by this, I always wonder how they feel about that, just that their funding is constantly in flux. And I guess that we can, it would be interesting to know how they feel, but also we've seen this on a domestic level as well, just recently. So they could do a lot to kind of redirect funds back to domestic and international healthcare organizations, and without any kind of restriction on what kind of care they can discuss. So that is going to be major. In terms of staffing and personnel, President-elect Biden has already noted that he is going to make his cabinet and his staff look a lot more like demographically America, which I think is exciting for a lot of reasons. Not only do people kind of move up from positions like that, they could move up into any kind of, this could be potential breeding ground for presidential runs and things like that, or just, other runs for other higher offices.
Can I ask you a technical question about health and human services? Do you think because of the COVID challenges that there's more likely to be a technical person, Secretary of Health and Human Services, or do you think it's more likely to be a policy, politico kind of person?
Well, that's a good question. I think, well, if they're smart, they would probably get a good mix of both in there. And I do think that someone technical is going to be needed, and especially as they roll out the vaccine, because that's an enormous undertaking. And, you need somebody who can work with other departments, who can work with, I suppose, whoever needs to be on board to distribute this vaccine and make sure that, things are, the right pieces are in place. They will also have policy folks in there. And when I think about a department, any of the departments, they're especially some of the larger ones like Health and Human Services, they are compartmentalized where there's like different things going on and different bureaus within it. So I do think that some are better suited for more technical folks, and then some are going to be on the more policy end. So yeah, hopefully they'd strike a balance for both. That would be the best case scenario.
Can I chime in one little thing? So with this discussion of having the White House and the administration look more like the American people, there was so already Jen O'Malley Dillon, who ran the campaign, has been appointed to be deputy chief of staff, which is a really high-ranking, important position. And this makes a difference in so many ways, both profound in terms of the policy discussions in the room, but also, small things that make government more welcoming to non-white men. And so like there's a perfect example of this from under the Obama administration. One of his deputy chiefs of staff was a woman named Alyssa Mastromonaco. And in her book, which I highly recommend because it's a very entertaining read, she talks about how prior to the Obama administration, there were so few women who had really been working in the White House on a regular way in positions of power, that in the few women's restrooms in the White House, there was no machine where you could purchase sanitary products. And that creates, of course, all sorts of difficulties for anyone who has menstruated in their lives. And so she, because of her experience, that was just by virtue of menstruating, having that be part of her life experience, got a machine put in the ladies' room. Like, that's such a little thing in the scheme of policy making and government in the world. But I think it exemplifies how having a diverse population of people who are in the room making decisions trickles down.
Right. That's a really good illustration. And by the way, she's on a really great podcast that I'd like to highlight called Hysteria, which is really fun. It's fun to hear her kind of let loose. But that's really important, because when it's not there, it's a sort of hostility, right? An institutional hostility to folks whose bodies don't look like and function like an able-bodied cis white hetero man, which is the standard and kind of staffer, right? And so it matters. And then absent those things, it does create that institutional hostility that could then maybe prevent, in some ways, folks from entering into those positions, or they might think again about it, or they might not feel very comfortable even delegating tasks if they are in those positions, or speaking their minds, and being fully themselves and bringing their experience to bear in these positions. And so even those, what we might consider like little things, like having a tampon machine, it really does matter, really does matter. And it does matter demographically. I mean, why shouldn't the government just look more like America, right? This is, yeah.
There is a last question, and I do want to thank the viewers who persisted through a number of disruptions early in the webinar. So thank you very much for hanging in there and asking good questions. This is a question about the Electoral College vote and releasing money, space, and communication. Will that December 14th Electoral College vote make the GSA decision moot, and therefore the money will come after the Electoral College vote?
I expect yes. I mean, given that we have never lived through this particular sequence of events before, Lord only knows sometimes. But I mean, when the Electoral College casts its votes, that's the next president. And so I can't see a valid way to keep those resources from the president-elect after that date. I just can't see something that would even stand up. Like, I could see someone trying again to do what Emily Murphy has done, but that's when you file a court case. That's when the good democracy, making sure government's working kind of court case that I talked about before, making sure the law is being followed honestly, that's good for democracy. And I cannot see a court that would say the person who's been elected by the Electoral College should be denied the resources that are allocated for the president-elect. It just, I am
Okay.
not that cynical.
Oh, good. Amanda, I saw an alleged claim that there were gains made by right to life candidates, I think perhaps in the House. Can you give us a report on that particular issue and how the election might change members of the House?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so I think that the Republicans kind of, well, I don't want to say overperform, or I think they did better than folks thought they would in House races, especially when there was kind of, when there was a freshman member who kind of rode the blue wave in 2018. And that's kind of, I guess, expected a little bit of like rebalancing. But yeah, so some folks are right to lifers, right? And I still think that there is a strong contingent of folks in Congress who are very specifically right to life. They will introduce, and those bills will go nowhere, abortion bans and 20-week bans and, a whole host of things that they could do on the federal level. In fact, it doesn't even take a new person. Chris Smith from New Jersey, pretty famously from my home state of New Jersey, South Jersey, to introduce every single year a 20-week ban on abortion at the federal level. And it's not like, that ever does anything or makes it anywhere. But anyway, so those new folks who come in are going to find themselves in really good company. I think that, yeah, I don't think that the House is going to change much. The Senate, is always a question since it's still up for grabs right now in terms of the ideological balance. But my concern about reproductive rights isn't so much within Congress. My major concern is in the states. And so I think it's really good to look at kind of state races in across the nation that have happened and just try to see like who's made some gains there, which state houses flipped and are, I guess kind of safely blue now, or which ones have not and are still divided. I think states are the breeding ground for any kind of abortion.
Can the Congress pass legislation regulating abortion?
Yes, and they have. So for example, we have the Hyde Amendment, 1976, that was kind of restricts any federal funds from being used towards abortion. So they have and they can. It's just not as common. It's not as salient.
Mostly on funds, right? It's not on the actual permissibility.
Yeah, it's mostly on funding, like the Hyde Amendment, or they could do, regulating Planned Parenthood and funding, and stuff like that. But yeah, it's not so much on the congressional level, though they could.
Yeah, I just can't see it as long as Nancy Pelosi or a Democrat holds the speaker's gavel, that bill would never make it out of the Rules Committee, so it would never be debated. And so it's not moot, but it's a little bit moot.
They don't see the light of day for sure.
Okay, you want to make some last comments, Rebecca or Amanda?
I think my last comment would just be that after 4 years of the Trump administration, chaos has become normal in a way that I don't think we should always be, as citizens in a democracy, we should always be ready for our elected leaders to not do their job the way that we believe it should be done. That is part of being a citizen. But I think that what we've all just lived through is a level of dysfunction that is without comparison in the American experience. And so just because something has become normal doesn't mean we should expect it necessarily with the next administration. And that I think we almost are through this transition window, anything's up in the air. But once we get past that, I think we need to recalibrate our expectations of the standards we hold our politicians to, because we've okayed by being quiet a lot of stuff that's really would never have been okay in a prior administration. So we can't stop paying attention. We can't stop pretending that, you know, what happened was okay. We need to be aware of what happened. Some of the things that happened weren't okay, so that we can maybe make some changes so that what was a norm becomes law and becomes part of what we do as Americans.
Okay, Amanda, do you have any closing comments?
I definitely co-sign on that one, Professor Essler. Yeah, I do. I think that the two institutions that we should focus on, I think the most in terms of that dysfunction, is the Senate and the media as kind of like the fourth branch, because I do think that the media helped normalize. I'm going to be a little cynical here. The media did help normalize by kind of both sidesing things and trying to, that's a human condition, is to try to find the normalcy, the trend, and the, you know, the safety in something that's so abnormal and so chaotic and so dysfunctional. Like, that's a psychological trait. Like, we look for normalcy in things just to feel okay, to persist. But I do think that part of that very human thing had a cost to it, and that was kind of giving the President Trump this platform for 4 years in which he was able to sow all this chaos and break a lot of laws, by the way, from the smallest, Hatch Act, which does come with some criminal, jail time, right? To the larger things like obstruction of justice and democracy. And then, so for the Senate, I think if the Senate remains under Republican majority, I think we're going to be in another kind of obstructionist type situation where a Biden administration is going to have to find creative ways within the law to and the Constitution to kind of pass major reforms. And it's going to be difficult, even with a 50-50 Congress. I mean, it's still going to be difficult to wrangle everybody. And I think that it's going to make us look at the Senate a lot more. I mean, it's I don't know, a lot of other democracies around the world have not empowered their upper houses as much, or if not just gotten rid of them completely. So I think we're going to be seeing things on the table like filibuster reform and a lot of other institutional things. So I think we're going to see some institutional change, and I'm kind of looking forward to that.
Okay, thank you both. I want to say a few closing words myself, but not on this topic because we started so disruptedly. I want to go back in case some people didn't hear my earlier comments about the way we're going to end this semester in this course with a third quiz, and the third quiz will be uploaded on the iLearn sometime this week, and you'll have about 2 weeks to do it. And it will refer to foreign affairs panels on October 20th and October 27th. And it will be the same format. And if you don't have the required 70 average, you can do an extra credit assignment by taking 1 week's panel discussion and summarizing the main points from that week. And if you have any questions about how to do that, you can email me and I will be glad to try to clarify it further. And speaking about foreign affairs, we will reconvene the webinar after next week's Thanksgiving break, 2 weeks from today on December 1st. And on that occasion, we will look at the Biden administration from the point of view of foreign relations. And we will have our colleagues in international relations speculating on the foreign policy team. Maybe by then, we will even know some people who will be making policy with regard to foreign affairs. And I was struck by Marcela's comment that the gridlock in Washington, should the Republicans continue to control the Senate, might put greater spotlight on foreign affairs, where the president has a lot more freedom of making decisions and also using the bully pulpit to make statements about what's going on around the world. So I am sure, just like this week, our wonderful panel will have insights about the Biden administration, personnel and policies regarding foreign relations. And I look forward to seeing you then. Hopefully, we will have everything worked out so we won't have any disruption at the beginning of the webinar. And I want to take this opportunity to wish everyone certainly a safe and a gratifying Thanksgiving. And please use your head about how you celebrate. I know Zoom doesn't make cranberry sauce taste better, but if you're preventing illness and even serious illness, it is a decision that's well made to keep the long term in focus and celebrate the holiday safely. We will see you on December 1st. Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you, Amanda, and thank you all in the viewership for hanging in there with us. See you in 2 weeks. Bye.